My name is Thomas Wydra. I am the chief of the Hamden Police Department. Gentlemen, can you introduce yourselves?
Yeah, I'm Donovan Haynes. I go to Hamden High.
I'm Aaron Vaughn, and I'm a senior, and I go to West Haven High School.
I'm Ian Cook.
This is a short conversation about policing and teens, young men of color like yourselves. If you could start by just telling me what your perceptions are of the police right now.
Well, me personally, I view that the police are doing exactly what they need to do. They're protecting the community. And I feel as though that both the police and the community can do better to better unify with each other, because the police community, but the community, without the police, there's no community. Without the community, there's no police. So you really need to actually get together and see what both of us could do, not just the police and not just the community.
But yes, I agree with what Donovan said. You know, we're all community, police community, communities. We all work together. It's just only a small percentage of police, they act differently, not in a good way. And it's that some of them should be monitored, or like something. They should take extra steps to make sure that, you know, everyone's equal, because there's some cops or police who are racist, and, you know, things happen, and, you know, there's something that we should do to stop this from happening, you know.
I just think that they need to just take a step back sometimes from when they get to, like, see a person with a hoodie on. Like, maybe they're not always up to no good. Like, just watch them for a little bit, and, like, if nothing's happening, just let them go on. Don't confront them unless like they're obviously going to do something bad. Like, you just don't always assume that something bad is going to happen.
That's a great thought. And don't assume somebody who has a hoodie on is about to commit a crime or just committed a crime.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've noticed, I'm wearing a body camera. And in Hamden, all of our police officers wear body cameras. Can you tell me what your thoughts are on the police wearing body cameras?
I had a debate class last year in high school, and that was one of the topics that we brought up. And I was debating for it because I believe it's definitely something that should be worn by all police officers, but I was just wondering how much of it is actually going to help anything. Like, is it going to actually do something to make everything more transparent, or can it still be manipulated like a testimony in court?
So that's interesting, right? So I can tell you that they do help. They make us more accountable, more transparent. It provides an artificial recording of an event, right? Because the human brain is fraught with certain failures. Our memories are not all the same. This lacks emotion. This is a device that does not have emotion or compassion. It's a recording. It's not perfect. It doesn't tell the whole story. But I can tell you, for the 3 years we've had them in Hamden, they do work. Most of the time, they tell the story the way officers have described. Occasionally, we find an officer who slipped up and did something wrong. Fortunately, nothing terribly wrong yet in Hamden. But we've had great success with them. Aaron?
I also agree that the use of body cameras is definitely good, because there is sometimes, you know, people lie, sometimes people don't. Who knows? There's always misconception who's telling the truth and who's not. And with body cameras, you know, like you said, it's harder to lie with those, and, you know, it tells the truth. It helps you know who's telling the truth in the situation. Whether the cop is at fault or the person's at fault, who knows? You never know, because it's hard to believe. And someone can try to frame the other person, you never know. So, with something like this, it helps from preventing things like that happening.
I agree. Ian?
I think it's a very good idea, and they should definitely keep them for the situations that when it does happen, like someone gets killed by a police officer by accident, they know exactly what happened and they can get the problem solved. I would like to ask you, why do you think that police officers always assume that African Americans and Hispanics are up to no good, you could say?
Well, let me start by saying I don't think all police officers make that assumption. I truly believe it is a very small number. I'd be remiss if I didn't think that among 800,000 police officers in this country, that at least some draw that conclusion. I think, unfortunately, perhaps police officers over time, working in certain areas and dealing with incident after incident, make assumptions based on perhaps people who they arrest or who they deal with. And then they paint an entire demographic with that broad brush and ensure that they understand that before those biases creep in, that it is possible for it to happen. And all of us have subconscious biases in one way or another. It can be tragic when a police officer does. And so it's important for us to train them and to root out any of those biases that you're talking about. Again, I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that at least some of the police forces, or at least some of the police officers in this country,
I agree with
have
you,
engaged in.
So is there like a way to like, for police to like to like basically interact with, like, if they have to, like interact with a suspect without using lethal force? So like recently there's always, you find it like gunshots, but is there a way to, because like I feel like that maybe we hear these things, but like who knows, maybe they're just afraid or they don't know, so they just pull out a gun. But like, are they trained in other ways to like not just only use guns, like, like a taser or a mace or something?
Sure. So our training is intensive and comprehensive. Police officers are trained to use only that force necessary to overcome a threat or force or resistance. Sometimes adrenaline gets the best of all of us, but when it gets the best of a police officer, we can end up with tragic, results and circumstances. No, they are more trained now than ever, Aaron, and more trained in areas that we talked about earlier. De-escalation. Talk your way out of a situation if you can. We had an incident the other day in Hamden where we dealt with a person who was emotionally disturbed in the middle of the street. And rather than physically confront this individual, the officers talked to him literally while walking down the street and following him. A couple of city blocks, a couple of different streets. It took minutes, many minutes before an ambulance arrived, and they were able to get the individual to a hospital without injury resulting. So that's a perfect example of how we have changed from what may have happened 20 years ago.
I think that I feel like that we all agree that we're all bringing up the same points because we all view the same way. It's just, like I said, the community views the police in a certain way, and especially with, like I said, mentally disturbed. I feel that now that I'm hearing that you train new recruits so intensively, I feel even more trust in the police, because now I know that they're getting trained to the point where if they make a mistake, it's truly their own fault. It's not that the police is neglecting handling these situations.
Right. This simple dialogue, a few minutes of conversation, results in a different perception, and that's part of how we get past our conflicts and our misunderstandings in this country, is sometimes through just simple dialogue and us making each other understand each other's perspectives. Another thing we can do is make the public aware of our policies and our use of force policies, right? Which in Hamden, our use of force policy is like a book, a small book. But it can educate folks on how we engage in force and the measures that we take in investigating the use of force, which is very important to everybody.
So I drive, so I was just wondering, what is like a nice, safe, if I ever get pulled over by a police officer, what is a nice, like, safe way that I can wait for them to come up to me so I don't...
That's an excellent question. If you are stopped by a police officer, don't move about in the vehicle. Don't go to get your license. Don't go to get your registration, even though you know that's what an officer is likely going to ask you for. The best advice is to keep your hands on the steering wheel, and as the officer approaches, just cooperate with his or her verbal commands. But what we find at times is folks start fumbling about for documents that they know we're going to ask for, and that can cause an officer's stress level to rise. And I can speak from experience. That's not something that's comfortable on the approach to a vehicle with somebody moving their hands around, because at times, it might not happen often, but at times somebody might be hiding a weapon or grabbing a weapon, and so that heightens the officer's awareness. And that's an excellent question. Keep your hands on the steering wheel and just cooperate with the verbal commands.
I want, like was said, I want to become a police officer, and maybe more than that. How can I keep myself from becoming biased like that and keeping myself, taking a step back and not letting stereotypes cloud my judgment and stuff like that?
Look, I think you're there, Donovan. You clearly have been brought up in a way where you have an understanding of the world around you. I think the best advice I can give you is just to maintain the level of respect you have for people. All people have value, all life has value, and regardless of what somebody looks like or what physical challenges they may have or the color of their skin or their sexual orientation, just treat people the same way that you want yourself or your mom or your dad to be treated, and you'll do fine. That would be a huge stumbling block in anybody's background for a police position if they have ever engaged in some sort of behavior that was dehumanizing or racially motivated. That's an automatic bounce out of a process. But you're doing fine, I can tell.
In the 1 hour program, Ian shared an example of what he and his mother consider negative stereotyping by the Milford police and the security guards at the Milford Mall. Here is Ian's story.
Back to what Susie says. She says many people that wear, many of her friends wear hoodies and stuff. I constantly wear hoodies. I have so many of them. Always have my hood up and everything. And one time I was at the mall with my mom, and I was just walking around and I had my hood up, and someone came up to me and said that you have to take your hood off or you have to leave the premises. And I was just...
A security person?
Yeah, a security just came up to me and told me, like, if you don't take your hood off, you have to leave. And I was just kind of like speechless. I was like, my mom, she had no words to describe like how she felt. She's like, it's not like he's doing anything bad. It's just like, he's just walking with me. I'm his mom. Like, he's not doing anything wrong. And he's just like...
And you had to leave?
No, I had to take my hood off because we had to go do something. But I was just kind of speechless. I didn't know what to say. And then also... I've had some experiences, like I've been with a group of my friends, and
go ahead.
We were just walking around having fun, having a good time, and like there's like they came over to us again, and they're like, you can't hang out with more than like 4 people.
First of all, you should feel comfortable wearing whatever you want to wear.
Yeah.
And however, we need to focus more on people's behavior and not how they dress. I can only theorize that perhaps they've had problems at the mall with larger groups of people. I don't know. I'm just spitballing here.
And were you with other black
Yes,
boys?
I was. Most of my friends are actually African American. I have like a couple of Caucasian. Everyone. Yeah.
You need to focus more on behavior and how people conduct themselves than how they dress. That's just my opinion.
Yes, well, and you see, and this is why I think it's so helpful when we do this kind of program. We hope that the police department in Milford will learn something, because that's very disturbing, because that's what we talk about, stereotyping people or having some preconceived notions. Because if you dress, and this is exactly one of the scenarios that we were hoping to work on for the YouTube segment, is to have these kids share experiences and say to you, how would you teach your officers to react to this?
What made your mom become a police officer?
So it's a good question. I have an identical twin who is also a police officer in Hamden. And he wanted to be a police officer from as far back as when he was your age, Donovan. And I was a business major and had no thought of becoming a police officer. But I started taking classes in the criminal justice field, because the field I was in was a bit boring for me. And I sort of followed him, and I followed my brother into policing. We were hired on the same day in Hamden, 23 and a half years ago, and it's been a tremendous journey. I'm so very grateful for the opportunities, and it might sound corny, but you can absolutely make a difference in this profession. You can help a person or more every single day. I feel like I'm doing something noble even right now. So it is honorable. It's something you should all think about getting into, because we talk about problems in our country. They can be solved by people like you. Chief Brown from Dallas said that after the tragedy in Dallas. He told the public at large, come and apply, come become part of the solution. You may think we're part of the problem, help us become part of the solution. I think that was a great statement by Chief Brown from Dallas, and so I would say the same thing to folks in this region as well. We have got to have trust. We have to improve trust, enhance it, build upon it, gain it where it doesn't exist. Trust is the most important component in the relationship between the public and the police. And so that you won't feel a stereotype. You won't look at a police encounter and assume the police officer is engaged in that encounter for some nefarious reason, right? If you have trust, you will perhaps walk by that encounter and say, must be something that the person did wrong, because the police officer wouldn't have have engaged in an encounter. But trust sometimes, as you know, can be hard to build. And when trust has been fractured, and we have seen that in certain places in this country, it is even harder to build upon, and it doesn't take days or weeks, it takes months and years. Trust is a major component.
As chief of the police, do you ever look globally to other police forces and take examples of what you should and should not do?
Every single day. Just a few weeks ago, a friend of mine, who's the chief in West Hartford, sent me their new transgender policy. In Hamden, we don't have a transgender policy. We will very soon. And so for me, I try to be progressive-minded and forward-thinking. And part of the way to do that is to be always aware of technology as it evolves and comes into existence, but also in terms of new police practices. There are some great stories from around the country. I think in St. Louis and Boston, they rolled out ice cream trucks over the summer with police officers inside of them in certain neighborhoods. That's a tremendous idea, right? That's thinking outside of the box. And so that's certainly something I try to do every single day. We do things like that. New Haven, I was at a meeting at the New Haven Police Department today, and they're talking about a basketball game that they're planning very soon. We did a basketball game at Eli Whitney Technical School back in March or April. And so we are trying to engage more and more with the public and all segments of the public, right? Perhaps especially folks in your age group. Because if we want to effect real change in terms of our relationships, I have thought for a long time we need to start with our young population. And then we can sustain those relationships over the long haul. Not just the relationships, but in terms of crime reduction. I think we need to focus more on our youth. I think we do a great job of that in Connecticut. We're doing better and better at it. And I think that's a real way to reduce crime rates as well. We're engaged in Hamden at the YMCA. Donovan, we have school resource officers. I don't know if you know Officer Scott Jason at the Hamden High School.
Yeah.
So we try to be fully engaged with our youth in Hamden. I think it's vitally important for us all. And I hope other departments are doing the same. We have to be smart when we select those officers.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I've said this before at forums. When I was a young officer at 22, I was not equipped to be a school resource officer. I just wasn't. I wouldn't have been prepared for that assignment. So I can tell you as the chief in Hamden, we select those officers very carefully. And we make sure they have the right mindset, that they are able to connect to the entire school population most effectively with students. Because that police officer in the school environment is kind of like a police chief. You are the police in that building. And so we go to great lengths to make sure we pick the right ones. And it's good to hear that West Haven does the same thing. Thank you, guys. It's a good conversation. Thank you.